It all began with a locked door. Not metaphorical, but an actual, literal locked door in my own home. Amanda, my wife, had always been someone who treated our house like her personal gallery. Open, pristine, and designed to impress anyone who walked through the front door. But about a month ago, she claimed one of the guest rooms as her creative space and shut me out of it completely. "I need a place to focus," she'd said, her tone light but her eyes unyielding as I asked why I couldn't even step foot inside. "Focus on what?" I'd pressed, mostly curious, though her reaction planted the tiniest seed of unease in me. Amanda wasn't an artist or a writer. The closest thing she had to a creative pursuit was making Pinterest boards. Her response was a dismissive shrug. "Design stuff. Don't worry about it." First, I laughed it off. If my wife wanted a little privacy for her hobbies, fine. It wasn't like I needed another room to dump my gym gear into. But then came the shifts in her behavior. She started spending hours in there, sometimes late into the night. I'd hear her laughing softly through the door, the kind of laugh you let out when someone says something clever, intimate, something meant just for you. When I'd knock, she'd crack the door open just wide enough to meet my eyes. "Everything okay?" she'd ask with a slightly raised eyebrow, as if I were the one acting suspicious. "Yeah," I'd reply every time, but it wasn't okay. Last week, I came home early from work. Amanda's car wasn't in the driveway, so I figured I had the house to myself. As I headed upstairs to change, I noticed something odd. The door to her creative space was ajar, wide open. This was my chance. The moment I stepped in, my heart started pounding. The room was immaculate, but wrong. She'd cleared out all the furniture and replaced it with a desk, a small couch, and a brand new laptop I didn't recognize. A faint smell of cologne lingered in the air, nothing she or I wore. On the desk, there was a wine glass, a half-empty bottle of Malbec, and 2 plates with crumbs from what looked like a fancy dessert. 2 plates. The blood rushed to my head as I pieced it together. Someone else had been here. Not last week, not last month, but today. The crumbs were fresh, the wine still breathing. I clenched my fists, suddenly overwhelmed by the invasion of it all. But it didn't stop there. I opened the laptop. Locked. I tried her birthday. No luck. Then our anniversary. Nothing. As I stood there, staring at the screen, the door creaked open behind me. "What are you doing?" Her voice was calm, too calm. I spun around to see Amanda standing there, still holding her purse. She didn't look startled or defensive, just mildly irritated, like I'd interrupted her rearranging the spice rack. "You tell me," I said, gesturing to the room. "What's going on here? Who's been in our house?" She blinked, then let out a dry laugh. "You're being ridiculous. It's a client. I've been meeting them here because their house is a mess, and this room is private." End of story. I didn't believe her. Her tone was confident, but her eyes flickered, just for a moment. I'd seen that flicker before. It was the same look she gave when she told me she hadn't hit the curb parking the car, even though the scrape on the bumper said otherwise. Which client? What kind of project needs a locked door and 2 wine glasses? I stepped closer, my voice rising. "Jason," she snapped, crossing her arms. "Don't do this. Don't turn into one of those controlling husbands who can't handle his wife having a life outside of him. You've been stressed about work. Maybe take a look at yourself before accusing me of God knows what." The audacity of her words made my stomach churn. This wasn't deflection, it was an outright power play. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even nervous. I wanted to push harder, to demand answers, but something about the way she looked at me stopped me in my tracks. She wasn't going to crack. Not yet. So I stepped back and said, "Fine. If it's nothing, then leave the door unlocked from now on." Her lips tightened for a fraction of a second. It was small, but I saw it. "Fine," she said. "If that'll help you sleep at night." She brushed past me and went downstairs, leaving me alone in that room that suddenly felt colder than it had a few minutes ago. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of the locked door or the lies or even the 2 wine glasses. It was the look on her face as she walked away. Calm, confident, almost smug. It wasn't the face of someone caught off guard. It was the face of someone playing a game they knew they were winning. The following day, I couldn't focus on anything. Not the company's quarterly reports. Not the endless stream of emails demanding my attention. Hell, not even the lunch sitting untouched on my desk. My mind was glued to the image of that room. The crumbs, the wine glasses, the locked laptop. Amanda's face as she brushed past me. I needed answers. Around midday, while Amanda was supposedly meeting another client, I decided to try something bold. I'd already backed off during our confrontation last night, and it had gotten me nowhere. If she wanted to lock me out of her world, fine. But I had the tools to break in. I picked up her old iPad from our shared office. It was rarely used, mostly collecting dust. She'd stopped carrying it around months ago when she upgraded her phone. But the best part? The iPad was still synced to her Apple ID. If there was something on her phone that I couldn't see, it might just show up here. I opened it and logged in. At first, there wasn't much: emails, Pinterest boards, and photos from months ago of our vacation to Napa Valley. Then I checked her messages. Nothing. Her inbox was suspiciously clean. No texts older than a week. Amanda was meticulous, but she wasn't the type to delete conversations regularly. My gut told me this wasn't accidental. Then I noticed it. A notification from her iCloud. A message that hadn't synced properly. It wasn't in the inbox, but it was listed in the backup logs. The preview was brief, only a few words, but they felt like a dagger to my chest. Meet me at 7. Same hotel. Room 214. The date was yesterday. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking together in a way that left no room for doubt. Amanda had been with someone else, not just in our home but in a hotel. Room 214. My grip tightened around the iPad. My first instinct was to text her, call her out on the spot. But something stopped me. She'd deny it. She'd twist it around, make me question myself. No, I needed more. I needed to catch her in the act. At 6:30 that evening, I parked outside a sleek boutique hotel on the other side of town. It was the kind of place where people didn't go to sleep, they went to stay hidden. My pulse raced as I stepped out of the car, but I kept my head down, blending in with the evening crowd. I entered the lobby, scanning the room for any sign of Amanda. Nothing yet. The elevator chimed in the corner, and I saw a couple step out. My nerves were screaming at me to go up, to confront whoever was behind that door in room 214. But I had no key card, and barging in wouldn't get me what I needed. Instead, I lingered near the bar, pretending to check my phone while keeping one eye on the elevators. At exactly 7:10, I saw her. Amanda stepped out of the elevator, wearing a black coat and heels I hadn't seen before. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, was a man I didn't recognize. Late 30s, sharp suit, dark hair slicked back. They didn't speak as they passed, but the way they moved screamed familiarity, intimacy. I stood frozen, my hands trembling at my sides. Amanda didn't even glance around as they exited the lobby and crossed the street to a parked car. They climbed in, and the car sped off before I could think to follow. I stayed there for what felt like hours, replaying the moment in my head. She hadn't just lied. She'd brought this stranger into our life, into our home, and now she was parading around with him like I didn't exist. When I finally returned to my car, the anger bubbling in my chest turned into something sharper. Resolve. I wasn't going to sit in silence while she humiliated me. If Amanda thought she could keep playing this game, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. The next morning, I woke up with a plan, and for the first time in days, a sense of clarity. Amanda thought she was untouchable, that I was too blind or too weak to catch her. That confidence was her weakness. I wasn't going to confront her outright. I was going to make her expose herself. I started by acting normal. Over breakfast, I smiled, made small talk, and even laughed at her forced jokes. She was in a great mood, humming to herself as she poured coffee. Busy day today? I asked, keeping my tone light. Super busy, she said, not even looking up. Meeting a new client downtown, so I'll probably be late. Don't wait up for dinner. Her lies were so smooth, so effortless, it almost made me sick. No problem, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Good luck. Once she left, I got to work. First, I hired a private investigator. I didn't want to be the guy who relied on sneaking around, but this wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about knowing everything. Where she went, who she met, what she did when she wasn't home. If Amanda was going to double-life me, I needed the full picture. By the time I finished explaining the situation to the PI, it was noon. While they got to work, I set my own plan into motion. Step 1, her laptop. After Amanda left, I returned to her locked, creative space. She'd been careless the night before and hadn't locked the door behind her. I turned on her laptop, and, as expected, it asked for a password. I didn't waste time guessing. This wasn't my first attempt. Instead, I pulled out a small USB device I'd ordered 2 days earlier. It was a password cracking tool that cost more than I was comfortable admitting, but at this point I didn't care. It took less than an hour. Once I was in, I scoured her files. The first thing I noticed was an entire folder labeled projects. It was empty, completely wiped. That told me she wasn't just hiding something. She was thorough about covering her tracks. But then I hit the jackpot, her email. Amanda had been using a private email account, one I'd never seen before. The inbox was clean, but she'd forgotten one critical thing, her trash folder. People always forget the trash. I opened it and found dozens of deleted emails from the same sender. Mark K. The subject lines were vague but damning. Can't wait to see you tonight. 2:14 is booked. As usual. I miss you, Amanda. Let's talk about him. That last one froze me. Let's talk about him. Was he referring to me? Were they laughing about me behind my back? Mocking me while they sipped wine in some hotel room? I downloaded everything, every email, every attachment. There wasn't a lot, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. Step 2. Bait the trap. That evening, I casually mentioned that I'd be flying out of town for a work conference over the weekend. Amanda's face lit up in a way that was too eager, too rehearsed. Oh, that's great. You've been working so hard, Jason. A little break will do you good. Yeah, I think so, I said, smiling. The company's been on my back to finalize this merger, so I'll be in meetings most of the time. I'll leave Friday morning. Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment, and I knew what she was thinking. Opportunity. The next 2 days were a test of patience. I had to act completely normal, all while my PI fed me updates on her movements. She wasn't seeing Mark in person during the day, but she was texting him constantly. On Thursday, she sent him a message that sealed her fate. Jason's gone this weekend. I'll meet you at the usual place Friday night. I stared at that text for what felt like hours, my blood boiling and my heart pounding. She didn't even care anymore. There was no hesitation, no concern about being caught. She was bold now, confident that I was too oblivious to figure it out. Friday morning, I packed a bag, kissed her goodbye, and drove to the airport. Only I never got on a plane. Instead, I doubled back and parked near the hotel where they always met. I waited for hours, fueled by adrenaline and rage. At exactly 7:30 p.m., Amanda's car pulled into the lot. She stepped out wearing the same black coat and heels as before. This time, she wasn't alone. Mark was with her, his arms slung casually around her waist as they walked inside. I followed, careful to keep my distance. When they reached room 214, I watched them disappear inside. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Not to Amanda and not to Mark. I called the PI. Are you ready? I asked, my voice low. Ready, they replied. As I stood in that hallway, just a few feet from the door where my wife and her lover were hiding, I smiled for the first time in days. They thought they were safe. They thought I was clueless. They had no idea what was about to hit them. I stood outside room 214, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The hallway was quiet, almost eerily so, with the faint hum of a vending machine somewhere in the distance. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times, imagining every detail. Would she scream? Cry? Beg? Would he try to run or play the smug tough guy? The PI arrived seconds later, carrying the tools of their trade. Discreet recording equipment and a folder full of the evidence they'd collected over the last few days. You sure about this? They asked quietly, their voice steady. Positive, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I wasn't here to make peace. I wasn't here to get closure or listen to excuses. I was here to take back control of my life. I knocked on the door. For a moment there was silence. Then, faint footsteps. A shadow moved under the door, and I heard Amanda's voice, muffled but clear enough to recognize. Did you forget something? She said, probably assuming it was Mark returning from the hallway vending machine. The lock clicked, the door cracked open, and there she was, Amanda, in a silk robe that wasn't hers, with her hair slightly disheveled and a glass of wine in hand. Her smile froze the instant she saw me. Jason? She said, her voice a mix of confusion and fear. She instinctively tightened the robe around herself, her eyes darting over my shoulder as if to check for witnesses. Can I come in? I asked, my voice calm. Too calm. What are you? I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped inside, and the air in the room hit me like a punch to the gut. The smell of cologne, the rumpled bed, the second wine glass on the table. It all screamed of betrayal. Mark was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt half unbuttoned, his face frozen in shock. He stood up quickly, holding his hands up like I'd walked in with a weapon. Whoa, 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 he stammered. Let's just talk about this. Amanda shut the door behind me, her voice shaking as she tried to play damage control. Jason, this isn't what it looks like. Don't, I said, cutting her off. My voice was still calm, but it carried an edge that made her flinch. Don't insult me by pretending. I know everything. The emails, the hotel meetups, the lies. I turned to Mark, who looked like he wanted to evaporate. You must be Mark. Hope the wine was worth it. Mark swallowed hard, clearly panicking. Listen, man. You didn't what? I snapped, my voice finally rising. You didn't think I'd find out? Or you didn't care? He looked at Amanda, desperate for backup, but she was too busy staring at the floor like it might swallow her whole. I don't have time for your excuses, I continued, taking another step toward him. Get your stuff and leave. Now. Mark hesitated, glancing at Amanda as if waiting for her to say something. She didn't. Get out. I repeated, my voice low but deadly. He grabbed his shoes and jacket, muttering something under his breath as he brushed past me and bolted for the door. The second it shut behind him, the tension in the room shifted. Amanda looked up at me, her eyes wide and glistening. For a second, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead, she took a deep breath and said, You shouldn't have come here. I stared at her, stunned. I shouldn't have come here? Are you serious right now? You're in a hotel room with another man, and you're blaming me? She crossed her arms, her posture defiant despite the tears threatening to spill. I didn't want it to happen this way. I was going to tell you. Tell me what? That you've been screwing around behind my back while I've been busting my ass to keep our life together? That you've been lying to my face every single day? I wasn't happy, Jason, she shouted, her voice cracking. You're so consumed with work, with your precious company. You barely even see me anymore. I needed someone who made me feel alive. The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. So your solution, I said slowly, my voice shaking, was to humiliate me? To sneak around like a coward instead of talking to me? Instead of fixing what was broken? She looked away, her silence speaking louder than any apology ever could. I pulled out my phone and opened the email folder I'd downloaded earlier. Do you recognize these? I asked, scrolling through the incriminating messages. Her face went pale. Jason? I have everything, I said, my voice cold. The emails, the texts, the hotel receipts. You thought you were so clever, Amanda, but you're sloppy. And now I'm done. Her eyes snapped back to mine, panic replacing defiance. What do you mean, done? Jason, we can work through this. You don't get to decide that, I said, cutting her off. Not anymore. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Jason, please, don't throw everything away over one mistake. One mistake. I laughed bitterly, pulling away from her. This wasn't a mistake, Amanda. It was a choice, and you made it, over and over again. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I strode down the hallway, my chest heaving with adrenaline, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt empty. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about walking away. It was about making sure she couldn't walk away from this without consequences. By the time I got back to my car, my hands were trembling. Not with fear, but with the fury of someone who had been played for too long. Amanda's betrayal wasn't just a crack in the foundation. It was the wrecking ball that had torn the whole house down. But I wasn't about to let her walk away from this like she was the victim. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. "Jason, it's late," Aaron said. His voice groggy from what I imagined was a comfortable evening at home. "This better be important." "Oh, it's important," I said, my tone sharp enough to wake him up completely. "Amanda's been cheating on me. I've got proof, emails, hotel records, the whole package. I want to know exactly what my options are." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right," he said finally, his tone shifting to professional mode. "You want to file for divorce?" "Not just divorce," I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "I want to make sure she doesn't walk away with a damn thing. The house, the money, everything. She doesn't deserve it." Aaron sighed. "Look, I get it, but we have to play this smart. Courts don't always care about infidelity unless it directly affects marital assets or the well-being of any kids." "We don't have kids," I cut in. "And I can prove she's been using my money for these affairs." I practically spat the last word. That got his attention. "If that's the case, we've got leverage. Gather everything you have and send it to me. I'll start drafting the paperwork first thing tomorrow." "Good," I said, ending the call. But I wasn't done yet. Amanda needed to feel the consequences of her actions now, not months from now when the divorce was finalized. I scrolled through my phone until I found Rachel's number. Rachel had been Amanda's best friend since college, but I always got the sense she didn't approve of Amanda's behavior. She had a way of looking at me during parties or dinners like she knew something I didn't. "Jason," she answered, surprised to hear from me. "I need to ask you something, Rachel," I said, my voice cold and direct. "How long have you known Amanda's been cheating on me?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she said, "I didn't know for sure, but I suspected." "You suspected?" I said, laughing bitterly. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "It wasn't my place," she snapped, her guilt evident. "Look, I didn't want to get involved, okay? But if it helps, I've always thought Mark was a sleazeball. He's been chasing Amanda for years. That stopped me." "Years? You're telling me this didn't just start recently?" Rachel hesitated, then sighed. "Jason, I think Mark's been in her life on and off since before you two even got married. She told me once they had a thing, but I thought she ended it when she met you." The floor beneath me felt like it had dropped out. "Since before we got married," I repeated, my voice hollow. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, sounding genuinely remorseful. "I should have said something. I just didn't know how." I ended the call without another word, my mind spinning. Amanda's betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just some midlife fling. It was a pattern, a web of lies she'd been weaving for years, and I'd been the sucker caught in it. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. Amanda was sitting in the living room, still in the silk robe from the hotel, as if she hadn't even bothered to pretend she wasn't caught. "You're back," she said, her voice tentative. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the dining table, pulled out a chair, and dropped the folder of evidence the PI had compiled onto the table with a heavy thud. Emails, texts, bank records, photos. Amanda stared at the folder, her face going pale. "What's this?" she asked, though her voice betrayed that she already knew. "This," I said, sitting across from her, "is the end of your little charade. I've talked to my lawyer. I've got everything I need to make sure you walk away with nothing. No house, no savings, no spousal support. You're done, Amanda." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then she surprised me. Instead of breaking down, she smirked. "You really think you're going to win this, Jason?" she said, leaning back in her chair. "Go ahead. Drag me through court. Air out all our dirty laundry. But don't forget, I know things about you too." I froze. "What the hell are you talking about?" Her smirk widened. "You think you're squeaky clean? Think the board at your precious company will be thrilled to find out about your little tax shortcuts." My blood turned to ice. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew enough. Over the years, I'd made some less than perfect decisions to keep the company afloat. Nothing outright illegal, but close enough to look bad if someone spun it the right way. "You wouldn't dare," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Wouldn't I?" she said, her eyes gleaming with defiance. You come for me, Jason. I'll burn it all to the ground. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us heavier than anything we'd said. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a standoff. A game of chicken where the stakes were everything we'd built, and everything we could destroy. Amanda's smirk lingered in the air long after she said those words. I'll burn it all to the ground. It wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge, and I knew her well enough to know she wasn't bluffing. But if she thought I was going to back down, she didn't know me nearly as well as she believed. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate calm. She watched me, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. You want to play dirty, Amanda? I said, my voice low and steady. Fine, let's play. Her smirk faltered for just a moment, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. I walked out of the room without another word, her gaze burning into my back, and headed straight to my office. The gloves were off. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours combing through every shred of evidence I had on Amanda, looking for leverage. Her arrogance had always been her Achilles heel, and she'd left a trail of carelessness behind her that she probably thought I'd never find. First, there were her finances. Amanda had always been reckless with money, but digging into her accounts revealed the true extent of her spending. Luxury clothes, expensive dinners, weekends at high-end spas. Most of which I hadn't known about because they'd been charged to a credit card I didn't even know she had. And then there was the hotel. The receipts painted a damning picture. Amanda and Mark had been meeting at the same hotel for nearly 6 months. Same room, same time, like clockwork. But what made it worse, what really made my blood boil, was that she'd been paying for it with our joint account. My money funding their affair. Next, I called Aaron, my lawyer, again. Jason, it's 6 a.m., he groaned when he picked up. Good, I snapped. You're awake. I've got more dirt, and I want to make sure we use every single bit of it. I told him everything. The hidden credit card, the hotel receipts, even her veiled threats about exposing me to the board. He listened patiently, his tone calm and measured as always. But when I finished, he let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding about the scorched earth approach, he said. All right, here's what we'll do. We'll file for divorce immediately and request an emergency hearing to freeze the joint assets. That'll stop her from draining the account or running off with anything. And the house? I asked. If we can prove she's been using marital assets to fund her affair, you've got a strong case to keep it. Do it, I said. And Aaron, make it hurt. He hesitated. Jason, I get that you're angry. This isn't anger, I interrupted. This is justice. By mid-morning, everything was in motion. The court filings, the asset freeze, the private investigator preparing to testify if it came to that. I'd set a legal avalanche rolling, and Amanda had no idea it was coming. I spent the rest of the day tying up loose ends. First, I sent an email to the board of my company, preemptively addressing Amanda's threats. I framed it as a precautionary measure, subtly discrediting her in the process. If she tried to smear me, it would backfire. Next, I started packing her things. Not haphazardly or out of spite. I wanted her to see that I was done, that this wasn't just another fight she could manipulate her way out of. I neatly folded her clothes, boxed up her jewelry, and set everything by the front door. When Amanda finally walked through the door that evening, she froze. What the hell is this? She asked, staring at the boxes. I'm giving you a head start, I said, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed. The papers are being filed. The assets are frozen. You can either pack up and leave now, or wait until the court orders you out. Her face twisted into a mask of fury. You think you can just throw me out of my own house? It's not your house anymore, I said, my tone cold. Not after what you've done. She stormed over to me, her voice rising. You're not some innocent victim here, Jason. You neglected me for years. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to shift the blame. This isn't about me working late or missing a date night. This is about you sneaking around, lying to my face, and betraying everything we built together. You made your choices, Amanda. Now you get to live with them. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the kind that came from remorse. They were tears of frustration, of realizing she was losing control. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I'll make sure of it. I laughed bitterly. You already tried that, remember? The board? The taxes? Go ahead, Amanda. Pull whatever stunt you want. Just know that I'm ready for it. You've lost. And deep down, you know it. For the first time, she didn't have a response. She stood there, trembling, her defiance crumbling under the weight of reality. Finally, she grabbed her phone and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. The house felt quieter, colder. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was exhaustion. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't on the defensive. And I wasn't going to stop until Amanda learned exactly what happens when you set fire to the wrong person's life. Amanda's threats hung in the air long after she stormed out. You're going to regret this. I'll make sure of it. Her voice, sharp and venomous, played on a loop in my mind, but I wasn't shaken. Not anymore. Whatever she had left in her arsenal, I was ready. This was no longer about holding on to a marriage. It was about holding on to my dignity, my sanity, and everything she tried to rip away. By the time I sat down in my office, the exhaustion I'd felt earlier had turned into a razor-sharp focus. I pulled up the email I'd sent to the board and reread it carefully. Amanda's threats to air out my business dealings were nothing more than smoke. If she'd had real ammunition, she'd have used it by now. Still, I needed to be proactive. That's when an idea struck me. Amanda had been sloppy in hiding her affair, but her arrogance might have left her exposed elsewhere. I opened my PI's report and dug deeper into Mark's background. If Amanda had tethered herself to this man, then maybe the key to ending this mess once and for all wasn't Amanda. It was him. The next morning, I made a call to the PI. I need you to find out everything you can about Mark K., I said, pacing my office. What kind of everything are we talking about? Everything, I repeated. Where he works, who he owes money to, whether he's got skeletons in his closet. Anything I can use to pull the rug out from under him. The PI chuckled softly. You're going for blood now, huh? I'm going for the truth, I replied coldly. It didn't take long for the PI to deliver. By midday, my phone buzzed with a message. You're going to want to see this. Attached was a detailed report on Mark K. And the contents were as damning as I'd hoped. Mark wasn't just a sleazeball cheating with my wife. He was also deep in debt, owing tens of thousands to creditors and maxing out every credit line he could find. Worse yet, he had a history of scamming women he'd dated, draining their accounts and leaving them in financial ruin. Amanda, I realized, wasn't just betraying me. She was playing right into the hands of a con artist. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I saw the kicker. Mark had been arrested twice for fraud. Once 5 years ago and again just last year. Both times, the charges were dropped, likely because his victims were too embarrassed to take him to court. This was it. The leverage I needed. That evening, Amanda returned home. She'd left with fire in her eyes, but when she walked back through the door, she looked subdued, almost hesitant. It didn't take a genius to figure out she'd spent the day trying to figure out her next move, and had come up empty. Still here? I asked casually as she walked into the kitchen. Don't start, Jason, she said, setting her purse down. I'm not in the mood. Oh, I'm sure you're not, I said, leaning against the counter. But I thought you'd want to hear what I found out about your boyfriend. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I smirked, pulling out my phone. Mark K., I said, scrolling to the PI's report. Let's see. Tens of thousands in debt. A history of defrauding women. 2 arrests for fraud. Sounds like a real winner, Amanda. You sure know how to pick them. Her face went pale. You're lying. I slid the phone across the counter toward her, letting her read it for herself. She scanned the report, her hands trembling slightly as the color drained from her face. I don't believe this, she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. Mark wouldn't. He's not like that. Really? I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Because it looks like he's exactly like that. And guess what? If you keep pushing me, Amanda, I'll make sure the courts know you've been funneling money to a man like this. Do you think they'll take your side when they see you've been financially supporting a known scammer? She glared at me, but the fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a flicker of desperation. "What do you want, Jason?" "I want this over," I said firmly. "You're going to sign the divorce papers. No fighting, no dragging it out. You'll take what the courts allow you and nothing more. If you try to come after me, I'll make sure everyone knows who you've been sleeping with. Your friends, your family, hell, even your clients. And I'll make sure Mark gets dragged down with you. Do you really think he'll stick around when you're no longer useful to him?" She stood there, staring at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the wheels turning in her head, weighing her options. But the truth was, she didn't have any left. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll sign." "Good," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Because I'm done playing games, Amanda. You lost." She stormed out of the kitchen without another word, leaving me alone with the weight of everything that had happened. I poured myself a drink and sat at the dining table, staring at the folder of evidence in front of me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The game was over. And this time, 1.2 weeks later, the divorce papers were signed, filed, and officially in motion. Amanda didn't fight. Whether it was because she realized she had no leverage or because she finally understood the depth of the hole she dug herself into, I didn't care. She packed her things and moved out within a week, leaving behind nothing but silence and the faint scent of her perfume. The house felt different without her, empty, sure, but also lighter. It was like the air itself had been purged of all the lies and tension that had weighed it down for so long. For the first time in years, I could think clearly. Amanda's departure wasn't quiet. She made one last attempt to get under my skin, sending me a text the day she left. "You'll regret this. You threw away everything we had over one mistake. Good luck finding someone who puts up with your endless hours and your cold, unfeeling self. Mark was right. You were never enough for me." I stared at the message for a long time before finally deleting it. I didn't respond. What was the point? Her words didn't sting anymore. They just felt hollow, like the desperate last gasp of someone who couldn't admit they'd lost. I didn't hear from Amanda after that. She faded into the background of my life like a bad dream, and the chaos she brought with her went with her. Mark, as expected, disappeared the moment the money dried up. I found out through a mutual friend that he'd ghosted her a few days after she moved out. Whether she was heartbroken or just humiliated, I didn't know, and I didn't care. What surprised me, though, was how quickly I began to feel free. For so long, I'd been so consumed by my anger, my need for justice, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. But now, with Amanda gone, I realized how much space she'd taken up in my life. Not just physically, but emotionally. In her absence, I rediscovered things I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I started running again, something I hadn't done since the early years of our marriage. I took weekends off work for the first time in years, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. I even started cooking, something Amanda had always claimed I was terrible at. But I quickly found out she was wrong about that, too. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled across a stack of photos from our early days together. Weddings, vacations, date nights, they felt like relics from another life. I held one photo in my hands for a long time. It was from our honeymoon in Santorini, a picture-perfect moment of us standing on a balcony overlooking the sea. We looked happy, carefree, and completely in love. But as I stared at the photo, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. In all the pictures, I was always the one looking at her, smiling at her, while she looked at the camera or somewhere else entirely. Maybe that had been the problem all along. The divorce was finalized a month later. I kept the house, the majority of the assets, and my dignity. Amanda walked away with far less than she'd hoped for, but the court was fair. More fair than she deserved, in my opinion. After the final hearing, as we left the courthouse, Amanda tried one last time to reach out. "Jason," she said, catching up to me on the courthouse steps. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry for everything. I mean that." I turned to look at her, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just indifference. "I hope you figure yourself out, Amanda," I said simply. "But we're done." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there on the steps, just another stranger in the crowd. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and my life looks nothing like it did before. The company is thriving, I've taken up new hobbies, and I'm finally spending time on the things and the people that matter. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were nights when the silence felt unbearable, when the weight of everything hit me all over again. But over time, those moments became fewer and farther between. If I've learned anything from this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you, what you do after does. Amanda's actions could have destroyed me, but instead, they pushed me to rebuild, to start over. And in the end, that's exactly what I've done. For anyone reading this who's going through something similar, don't let the betrayal consume you. Use it. Let it sharpen you, strengthen you, and remind you of your worth. Because trust me, life on the other side is better than you think. And as for Amanda, well, I heard through the grapevine that Mark swindled her out of what little she had left before skipping town. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the end, I got everything I needed, and Amanda? She got exactly what she deserved.